At the counter, I heard it, a cashier whispering ugly rumors about my son. My blood froze. They thought I wouldn't hear, that I was blind with trust, but family betrayal cuts the deepest. So I hid, I waited, and with their very own ledger, I prepared to destroy them. Under the harsh buzz of the grocery store lights, Helen Parker froze. The cashier, Jason Miller, hands trembling, eyes rimmed with fear, leaned in and whispered, "If you're really Daniel Parker's mother, open your eyes. They're not who you think they are." His gaze flicked to the ceiling camera, then to the handwritten ledger half hidden under the register. Pages, Rach Mep, Vi Dong, Sobi Xao Muk. Sticky notes, Gi, cash only. "What do you mean?" Helen asked, heartbeat thudding. Jason's throat bobbed. He stuffed her receipt into the bag without meeting her eyes. I can't," he muttered, shifting the ledger deeper out of sight. Silence screamed louder than words. On her way out, Helen caught a glimpse of a crumpled receipt pinned by the till. A familiar name hastily scribbled along the paper's edge, as if someone had tried to cover it up. Near the door, the owner laughed quietly with an assistant. A metal cash box clicked shut. A chill ran down Helen's spine. Driving home through drizzle, the phrase "open your eyes" hammered in her skull. She replayed the details. Jason's blue-knuckled grip, the camera's blind spot right above aisle 3, the ledger with numbers that didn't add up. If this was about her son, someone was hiding something, and she had just seen where they kept it. Helen turned the car around. Back in the parking lot, she killed the headlights and waited. Staff began to close up, lights dropping row by row until only the front tills glowed. Jason lingered at the counter, glancing toward the office door, then slipped a folded note into the ledger's spine as if leaving a breadcrumb he was too afraid to name. Helen slid from her seat, umbrella low, shoes quiet on wet asphalt. She moved along the shadow of the wall, counting the cameras, watching for the dead angles. Inside, a mop bucket rolled by. A lock clicked. Voices faded. When the last light over aisle 3 flickered, Helen made her choice, not to confront but to hide. She found the blind spot Jason had looked at, held her breath behind a stack of paper towels, and fixed her eyes on the ledger under the register. If truth lived anywhere in this store, it lived there. And tonight, she would open her eyes. Before we go deeper into Helen's journey, a story of sacrifice, betrayal, and a twist no one saw coming, pause with me for a moment. Before diving into today's dramatic story, remember to subscribe to Twist Stories and hit the notification bell. Here you'll always find tales of sacrifice, betrayal, and unexpected reversals. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment. Below, your own story might echo within the next one. Now let's return to Helen Parker. Helen Parker was 62, a retired nurse who had spent decades working double shifts, missing holidays, saving every spare penny, not for herself, but for her son, Daniel. Her late husband's death had left her a widow at 45, yet she never remarried. "My boy comes first," she would tell anyone who asked. Daniel was her pride, her reason to keep going through exhaustion and aching bones. When Daniel married Madison Hayes, Maddie, as everyone called her, Helen welcomed the young woman with open arms. Maddie was charming, ambitious, with a smile that could soften stone. Helen wanted to believe Maddie would be the daughter she never had, but almost immediately there were requests. It began small. "We're short on rent this month, Mom," just until Dan gets his promotion, then larger. "The car broke down, and it's too dangerous for us to drive without fixing it. Could you help?" Each time, Helen opened her checkbook without hesitation. What was money compared to her son's comfort, his happiness? Still, something in her nurse's instincts, a sixth sense honed from decades of reading faces, stirred uneasily. The tears Maddie shed when explaining emergencies, the way her father Robert always appeared at family dinners with tales of financial crises. Helen noticed little cracks, but she brushed them aside. Maybe I'm just being too suspicious. Maybe this is what family does. We help each other. Yet Jason's words at the grocery store reignited that buried suspicion. On nights when her back ached from old injuries, Helen would sit with her ledger book. Every nurse kept records. It was a habit she never abandoned. Page after page was filled with neat handwriting, the thousands she had sent Daniel and Maddie over the years. Rent, medical emergencies, vacation money to de-stress. She looked at the totals and pressed her lips together, whispering to herself, "It doesn't matter. Dan's happy. That's what matters. But the truth?" Helen hadn't bought herself new shoes in 3 years. Her house still had peeling wallpaper in the hallway. She clipped coupons for groceries. And yet, whenever Maddie called with her sweet, desperate voice, "Mom, I don't know who else to turn to," Helen caved every single time. It was at Daniel's 35th birthday dinner when Helen first noticed something she couldn't ignore. They had gathered at a lavish steakhouse downtown. Helen sat at the edge of the long mahogany table, watching waiters pour glasses of imported wine, steaks sizzling on plates, the air thick with the smell of indulgence. Daniel raised his glass, glowing with joy, while Maddie leaned against him in her designer dress, diamond earrings sparkling. Helen's fork paused midway. She knew those earrings. They were from Tiffany's. Months ago, Maddie had cried over the phone about needing $3,000 for urgent dental surgery. Her eyes drifted back to those earrings, and suddenly, she wasn't sure if the ache in her chest was heartbreak or fury. Have you ever had that moment when the truth hides in plain sight and suddenly you realize you've been blind for too long? If you were Helen, what would you do? Stay silent for the sake of peace? Or start asking questions no one wants answered? Share your thoughts in the comments. You might be surprised how many others have stood where you stand. Weeks later, while watering her roses, Helen heard the voice of Mrs. Whitman, the neighbor who had lived on the street for 30 years. "You know, Helen," she said carefully, "it's not my business, but people talk. The Hayes family, they're always flashing wealth. New cars, new clothes. Funny, considering how often they say they're struggling." Helen stiffened. "Are you saying they're lying?" Mrs. Whitman hesitated, then leaned closer. "All I'm saying is the whole neighborhood sees it. Except maybe your son. He loves her too much." The words sliced through Helen like cold steel. That night, Helen opened her ledger again, but this time she started a new section, not for her expenses. No, this one was different. She called it the Truth Notebook. Each suspicious detail, each whispered warning, each inconsistency, she wrote it all down. Because for the first time, Helen Parker wasn't just a mother hoping for the best. She was a woman preparing for war, and deep down she knew something is coming, and when it does, I will be ready. The phone rang just as Helen was folding laundry on a quiet Tuesday morning. She smiled, recognizing Daniel's number, but when she answered, it wasn't his voice. "Hi, Mom." Maddie's syrupy tone floated through the line. "I hate to bother you again, but our car broke down on the freeway. It's going to cost at least $2,000 to repair. We really don't have anyone else to ask." Helen's chest tightened. It wasn't the first time she'd heard those words. She glanced at her notebook, flipping to the page labeled Suspicious Requests. Already there were half a dozen entries about car troubles, each emergency, solved with her money. "Maddie," she said slowly, "how is it that every few months the car needs thousands of dollars? Wouldn't it make more sense to just buy a more reliable one?" There was a pause. Then Maddie's voice sharpened. "Helen, I thought you wanted us to be safe." Isn't Daniel's safety worth more than money? Helen closed her eyes. Of course it is, she whispered, and once again she wrote another check. Have you ever noticed how guilt can be the sharpest tool in manipulation? Maddie knew exactly which strings to pull, and Helen, like so many mothers, had taught herself that sacrifice was love. But sacrifice without boundaries can quickly become surrender. Would you have said yes or drawn a line? Later that week, Helen was at the pharmacy when she saw a familiar figure stepping out of a gleaming black SUV, Robert Hayes, Maddie's father. He wore a crisp suit, sunglasses, and carried shopping bags from luxury stores. Helen froze. Only last month, Robert had sat at her dinner table sighing dramatically about business struggles and hinting at the need for support. Daniel, loyal to his in-laws, had pressed Helen to cover their short-term debt. She ducked behind a row of parked cars, her heart racing, and pulled out her old flip phone. With trembling fingers, she snapped a blurry picture of Robert loading the designer bags into the SUV. That evening, she pasted the photo into her truth notebook. Underneath, she wrote, "If they're broke, why Louis Vuitton?" That night, Helen sat alone at her kitchen table, the lamp casting a yellow glow on the worn wood. Her thoughts drifted back to a memory of Daniel at 12, coughing violently through the night. The doctor had recommended an expensive inhaler. Insurance barely covered it. Helen had worked 3 straight weekends, taking on extra shifts to afford it. She never hesitated. She never once told her son how much it cost her body, her health. Because to her, Daniel's well-being was priceless. But now, as she looked at Maddie's diamond earrings and Robert's SUV, she felt something she'd never associated with her sacrifices before: betrayal. One Sunday afternoon, Helen dropped by Daniel and Maddie's house, unannounced. She carried a casserole dish, hoping to mask her true intent with motherly care. As she stepped into their living room, her eyes swept across the scene. A new leather couch, a flat-screen TV larger than any she had ever owned, shopping bags still piled in the corner, their logos screaming luxury. Her nurse's instinct itched again. Something was off. While Maddie busied herself in the kitchen, Helen noticed a small notebook on the side table. She wasn't snooping, at least that's what she told herself. But when her eyes caught the words on the open page, her breath stopped. It wasn't just a notebook, it was a ledger. Each line listed expenses: rent, car repairs, medical emergencies, exactly the ones Maddie had begged Helen to cover. But next to them were cold, calculating notes. Target, $3,000. If she resists, remind her Dan needs it. Helen's hands trembled as she closed the ledger. She quickly slipped back into her seat just as Maddie returned with tea. Her smile was bright, too bright. What would you have done in that moment? Expose the lies immediately or stay silent and wait for the right time? Helen chose silence, but silence with purpose, because now she knew the truth. When Helen finally mustered the courage to bring her suspicions to Daniel, his reaction cut deeper than she expected. "Dan," she said one evening, laying the blurry photo of Robert's SUV on the table, "I need you to look at this. They're not struggling. They've been lying." Daniel glanced at the photo, then back at her, his jaw tightening. "Mom, please." "You're reading too much into this. Dad Hayes has good months and bad months. You don't understand how business works. Daniel." "No." His voice rose, startling her. "Stop interfering in my marriage. Maddie and her family are good people. Why can't you just accept that?" Helen's eyes stung. For the first time in her life, her son's words felt like rejection. She didn't argue. She simply closed her notebook, slid it back into her purse, and whispered, "One day, Daniel, you'll see." That night, Helen sat at her desk, flipping through her truth notebook. Each entry, each photo, each note felt heavier now. She realized something. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about dignity, about the difference between love and exploitation. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel anger, not at Daniel, but at those who twisted his trust. And anger, when paired with patience, can be the sharpest weapon. Weeks later, Daniel came to visit. His face looked pale, his movement sluggish. He admitted he had been working exhausting hours to cover debts Maddie insisted were urgent. Helen reached out to touch his hand. "Daniel, what debts?" Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. Maddie's name lit the screen. He picked up, his voice weary. "Yes, Maddie." "I'll ask Mom." Helen froze. The words weren't just suspicion anymore. They were confirmation. Her son was drowning and Maddie's hands were on the rope, and Helen knew the time for quiet notes was ending. The time for action was near. Daniel arrived one evening looking worse than Helen had ever seen him. His tie was loosened, his shoulders hunched, his eyes heavy with sleepless nights. "Dan," Helen said softly, "you look exhausted. What's happening to you?" He collapsed onto her couch, running his hands through his hair. "It's the bills, Mom." "Maddie says we're drowning. Credit cards, medical costs, repairs. I'm working 60 hours a week and it's still not enough. She's scared. She says if I don't provide, I'm failing her." Helen's heart clenched. She wanted to shake him, to scream, "Can't you see she's draining you dry?" But instead, she only whispered, "Daniel, love shouldn't feel like debt." He shook his head. "Mom, don't start. Maddie needs me. You wouldn't understand, but Helen did understand, more than he could imagine." Have you ever watched someone you love walk straight into a fire, blind to the flames? That was Helen now, watching her only son burn, while the ones fanning the fire smiled sweetly across the table. What would you do if it were your child? Helen knew one thing. She couldn't rescue Daniel with lectures. Words bounced off him like raindrops on stone. He was too deep under Maddie's spell. So she shifted tactics. She began documenting everything, every emergency call, every bill Maddie waved like a flag of urgency. Helen clipped receipts, noted dates, and snapped photos whenever she could. Her truth notebook thickened, its pages filled with ink, evidence, and quiet rage. She didn't just want to prove Maddie wrong, she wanted to protect her son. One Saturday night, Helen attended a dinner at Maddie's parents' house. She went reluctantly, clutching her casserole dish like a shield. Inside, she found herself in a palace of excess. Chandeliers sparkled overhead. Imported champagne flowed freely. Waiters in crisp uniforms circled with trays of caviar and smoked salmon. Helen's eyes swept across the glittering crowd. Her chest tightened. Only a week ago, Maddie had begged her for $5,000, claiming Daniel's job was unstable and they couldn't make rent. Now here they were, hosting a party so extravagant it could have been featured in magazines. Helen's fingers dug into the strap of her purse. She wanted to scream across the room to expose every lie, but instead, she pressed her lips together and observed. That night, she wrote in her notebook, "Their desperation throws champagne parties." On the drive home, memories flooded Helen's mind. She saw herself in a younger body standing in the hospital cafeteria, counting out change to buy Daniel a sandwich because she couldn't afford more. She remembered turning down offers to remarry, fearing a new husband might resent Daniel. She remembered every shift, every sleepless night, every prayer whispered into the darkness. Let my son have a better life than this. And now, that better life was being siphoned by those who wore masks of need. Days later, Mrs. Whitman, the neighbor, stopped Helen outside her garden. "You know, dear," she said, lowering her voice, "the Hayes family isn't as clever as they think. Everyone in town knows they spend money faster than they make it. They've been living off others for years. You're not the first. Just—" The most generous Helen's lips trembled. "Daniel doesn't see it." Mrs. Whitman patted her arm. "Because love makes fools of us all. But the rest of us?" We see Helen went inside, sat at her desk, and added Mrs. Whitman's words to her notebook. The true turning point came one evening at Daniel's house. He had been searching for a pair of old sneakers when he accidentally knocked over a shoebox from the closet. Papers spilled across the floor. Among them, a slim black notebook slid out. Helen's breath caught the moment her eyes landed on it. She knew that book. She had seen it once before. Daniel bent down, flipping it open. His brows furrowed as he scanned the pages. "What the—" Helen leaned closer. The entries were damning. Exact sums of money, each tied to fabricated emergencies. Beside them, cruel notes. If Helen resists, guilt her with Dan's safety. Play the helpless card, works every time. Daniel's face drained of color. "Maddie wrote this?" His voice cracked. Helen swallowed hard. "Yes, Daniel. And I think you finally see what I've been trying to protect you from." Imagine standing in that moment, holding the proof of betrayal in your hands. Would you rage, collapse, or would you quietly steel yourself for what came next? Daniel's reaction would shape the storm that was about to break. At first, Daniel refused to believe. He slammed the notebook shut. "No, this has to be a misunderstanding. Maddie wouldn't— she couldn't—" Helen placed a trembling hand on his arm. "Daniel, my love, you've given her everything. And still, she asked for more. Doesn't that tell you something?" His chest heaved. "Mom, please don't make me choose between you and my wife." Tears filled Helen's eyes. "I would never ask you to choose. I'm only asking you to see." Daniel turned away, gripping the notebook so tightly his knuckles whitened. He didn't answer, but Helen knew the seed of truth had been planted. That night, Daniel returned home late. Maddie was waiting, smiling sweetly, but her smile faltered when she saw the notebook in his hand. "What's that?" she asked, her voice tightening. Daniel's jaw clenched. "Something you should explain." And for the first time, Maddie's mask slipped. The living room felt colder than usual that night. Maddie sat on the couch, her perfect posture faltering slightly as Daniel tossed the slim black notebook onto the coffee table. "Explain this," he demanded, his voice rough with exhaustion and disbelief. Maddie's eyes flickered to the book, then back to Daniel. She gave a short laugh, too sharp to sound natural. "That? Oh, come on. It's just a silly budgeting tool. My dad suggested it. You know how I like to organize things." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Organize? These aren't budgets. They're scripts. Scripts for manipulating my mother." Helen sat silently in the corner, watching the storm unfold. She wanted Daniel to see, to confront, to wake up fully. Maddie's smile turned icy. "Daniel, don't be ridiculous. She's twisting things. She always has." She pointed a finger at Helen. "She's jealous of me. She doesn't want you to have a real partner." Daniel slammed his hand on the table, making the notebook jump. "Don't you dare! Don't you dare put this on her! This ledger, these words, they're yours, Maddie, not hers." Just then, the front door opened and Robert Hayes stepped inside, carrying a bottle of whiskey. He froze when he saw the scene, his eyes darting to the notebook. "What's going on here?" he asked, feigning confusion. Daniel turned the ledger toward him. "Maybe you can explain, Robert." "Because I see notes about you too, about how Mom's money should keep the family afloat." Robert's face twitched before settling into a calm, oily smile. "It's just business, son." "Nothing personal. Families help each other. That's all this is. Helen's breath caught at his words. Nothing personal. The coldness of it sent a chill through her bones. What would you do if you heard someone dismiss years of sacrifice with the words, "nothing personal"? Would you lash out or hold your silence until the perfect moment? The room crackled with silence until Maddie suddenly leaned back, crossing her arms. Her mask had fully slipped now. "You want the truth?" she spat. "Fine. You were never a husband, Daniel. You were a walking wallet. That's all you've ever been." The words sliced through the air like a blade. Helen gasped, covering her mouth. Daniel stared at Maddie, his face draining of color. "A wallet?" Maddie smirked. "Did you really think I married you for love? Please, you were convenient, reliable, predictable. And your mother, even better. Always ready to play the savior." Daniel stood slowly, his body trembling with rage. He pulled off his wedding ring, staring at it for a long moment. Then, without a word, he placed it squarely on top of the ledger. "This marriage," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him, "is over. I will not live as your victim one more day." The silence that followed was deafening. Helen felt tears well in her eyes, not just sadness for the years her son had wasted, but relief. Relief that he had finally chosen dignity over delusion. Robert stepped forward, spreading his hands. "Daniel, listen. Families go through things. You can't just walk away like this. Think about appearances. Think about your reputation." Daniel turned to face him, eyes blazing. "Reputation? Do you think I care what people think when I know the truth? You've leeched off my mother, and now you want me to keep playing the fool?" No more. Robert's calm veneer cracked, but he had no words left. Now for so long, Helen had been the quiet observer, the silent giver. But not tonight. She stood, her voice firm, carrying years of restraint and sacrifice. This villa? These parties? This lifestyle? She gestured around the lavish room. It's all built on lies and stolen kindness. And from this moment on, you will not take another cent from me or my son. Her words rang like a gavel striking in a courtroom. Maddie's arrogance faltered. Her smirk trembled, replaced by desperation. "Daniel, wait! Please, we can fix this. It was just stress. We needed help, that's all. You can't throw away our marriage over this." Daniel shook his head slowly. "Desperation doesn't throw champagne parties, Maddie. You weren't desperate, you were entitled." The look on Maddie's face crumbled. For the first time, she had no script, no plan, no power. If you were in Helen's place watching this scene unfold, your son finally breaking free, the truth laid bare, what would you feel first? Anger, sadness, or that bittersweet relief that comes when justice finally arrives? Daniel picked up the ledger, tucked it under his arm, and turned towards the door. "Maddie," he said, his voice quieter now, "I'll see you in court. Because this," he held up the notebook, "is all the evidence I need." Maddie's face went pale. Robert sputtered, but no words came, and just like that, Daniel walked out. Helen followed, her heart heavy yet strangely light. Outside, the night air was cool against Helen's face. Daniel stopped on the sidewalk, his hands shaking. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I wasted so many years. I wasted so much of your love, your money." Helen placed her hands on his cheeks, forcing him to look at her. "You didn't waste my love, Daniel." Love isn't wasted when it's real. What's wasted is giving it to people who don't deserve it. But tonight, you took it back. He broke down then, his head against her shoulder, and for the first time in years, Helen felt hope stirring again. The war wasn't over. Divorces are messy, legal battles long, reputations fragile. But the tide had turned, and Helen knew. The Hayes family had underestimated her. They thought she was just an aging widow with a bleeding heart. But now, she was a mother armed with truth, and she wasn't done yet. Weeks later, Helen and Daniel sat side by side in a stark courtroom. Papers shuffled, lawyers whispered, and Maddie sat across the aisle, her face pale but still defiant. Robert Hayes loomed behind her, muttering with his attorney. The judge leaned forward, scanning the evidence. Daniel's attorney laid the black ledger on the desk with deliberate precision. "Your Honor," he said firmly, "this isn't speculation. This is written proof of manipulation and financial exploitation. My client was systematically deceived." The judge flipped through the pages, her brow furrowing deeper with every line. Notes like, "If Helen hesitates, cry harder and remind Dan he's a failure if he says no bled from the pages." Maddie shifted uncomfortably. Robert clenched his jaw. Helen sat still, her hands folded tightly, whispering a silent prayer. Let truth stand tall today. The judge's voice cut through the silence. "Mrs. Hayes, this court finds overwhelming evidence of deceit and financial misconduct. The petition for divorce is granted. Division of assets will favor Mr. Parker due to the fraudulent behavior presented here. Furthermore, Mr. Hayes, your actions in aiding and abetting this scheme are under review for potential charges." The gavel struck. Maddie gasped. Robert rose from his seat, protesting, but the bailiff's firm hand on his arm silenced him. Helen felt her chest swell with both relief and sorrow. Justice had spoken, but justice never comes without scars. If you've ever sat through a moment where truth was finally recognized, you know the mixture of emotions: relief, vindication, and grief for the years lost. Would you call it victory or simply survival? Outside the courthouse, Maddie hurried after Daniel, her eyes wide with desperation. "Daniel, wait! Don't do this! We can start over. I'll change, I promise. Just give me one more chance." Daniel stopped, turned, and looked at her. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of every sleepless night, every betrayal. "Desperation doesn't throw champagne parties, Maddie. You weren't desperate. You were entitled, and I'm done being your victim." He walked away without another word. Helen followed, glancing back only once to see Maddie crumpling against the courthouse steps. Weeks later, Daniel and Helen stood in a small, unfurnished apartment. The walls were bare, boxes stacked in corners. It was humble, but it was theirs. Free of manipulation, free of lies. As they unpacked dishes together, Daniel broke the silence. "I lost so much money, Mom. But what hurts more is realizing how blind I was, how I let her control me, how I let you suffer." Helen placed a plate on the shelf and turned to him. "You lost money, Daniel. But you gained clarity, and clarity is worth more than all the dollars in the world. You took your life back." His eyes glistened. He whispered, "I lost a marriage, but I found myself again." That night, Helen sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker. For the first time in years, she felt peace settling into her bones. She thought about her sacrifices, the years of double shifts, the sleepless nights, the endless giving, and she realized something profound. Love without boundaries becomes exploitation. She whispered softly, almost as though speaking to every mother in the world, kindness must be guarded. Because when kindness lacks wisdom, it turns into a knife pointed at your own heart. Respect is not guaranteed by blood. It is not secured by marriage vows. Respect is earned through honesty, loyalty, and kindness. And betrayal? It never truly wins, because lies collapse under the weight of their own greed. Helen's story reminds us, no matter how long it takes, truth has a way of surfacing, and when it does, justice follows. Have you ever experienced a moment like Helen's, when betrayal was unmasked, when truth finally rose after years of silence? If you were in Daniel's shoes, would you have forgiven or walked away, as he did? Share your story in the comments, because here, in this community, every story is a reminder. You are not alone. No one should suffer exploitation in silence. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment or even a note to your future self. And don't forget to subscribe to Twist Stories for more powerful tales of sacrifice, betrayal, and the twists that bring justice full circle. Because every family has secrets, and every secret has its reckoning. As the final box was unpacked, Daniel poured 2 glasses of water, raising one to his mother. "To fresh starts," he said. Helen smiled, clinking her glass against his. "And to the strength it takes to claim them." The clink echoed softly through the small apartment. A simple sound, but for Helen, it was the sweetest music she had heard in years.